Session. We've received apologies today from Senator Gerard Crockwell, and I'd just like to remind people of the mobile phone notice to ensure their phones are switched off. So today I'm delighted that we're having an exchange of views with the Irish delegation to the Committee of the Regions. I'm delighted to welcome all of the members of the Irish delegation to the European Committee of the Regions who have joined us here today. Michael Murphy, Head of the Irish delegation, Kieran McCarthy, Jory Lundy, Jory Murray, Deirdre Ford and Mary Freehill. As a committee, we have made a concerted effort to engage with those representing Ireland in the different European institutions, or those originally nominated by Ireland but not serving the EU directly. I think that this is vitally important. A key part of that picture is the European Committee of the Regions. So I think this is a very important engagement between us here today. And again, I appreciate very much every one of you are very busy in all your different roles, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here today, as I know all the members do as well. So before we begin, I just want to remind everybody of the rules on privilege. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make them identifiable. By virtue of Section 17(12) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. If you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person or entity by name, or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Mr Murphy, I might ask you to go first and make your opening statement, and we'll leave this be a fluid arrangement that as people want to interject, we'll have a sort of an open conversation, if that's all right. We needn't be too formal or regimented about it. Thank you again for being here.
Mr Chairman, on behalf of the delegation, can I thank you for the invitation to address this committee, this Oireachtas Committee on EU Affairs. Today I'm accompanied, as you said, by my fellow members of the delegation, Councillor Freehill, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Murray, Councillor Ford and Councillor Lundy. We do have apologies from Councillors Healy-Rae, Councillors Enda Stenson and Councillor Kate Feeney, who couldn't be with us today. Can I also acknowledge the presence of Jim Conway, Director of the Eastern and Midland Assembly, Sarah Holden on my right, who is the National Coordinator for the delegation, and Dr. Mike Brennan behind me, who's our EU Affairs Officer. And I'd like to put on record, without their support, we couldn't work effectively as a unit. I intend to share my opening statement with two of my colleagues. I will provide an overview of the current mandate of the COR, the work that has been undertaken by the Irish delegation and the priority issues for our regions. My colleagues, Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Freehill, will then speak about two priorities for the COR and their relevance for Ireland: the future of regional policy and the funding in the post-2020 period, and then the findings of the report on the task force on subsidiarity, proportionality and doing less more efficiently. At the outset of its current mandate, the Committee of the Regions identified 5 political priorities to guide its work. These priorities include recovery following the financial crisis and ensuring that growth is spread evenly across regions, developing trust in the EU at the local level and in supporting a dialogue between the European institutions, citizens and local and regional authorities. Events of the past 4 years, including the UK's decision to leave the European Union, the rise of populism and the continuing concern regarding the lag in public investment, illustrate that these priorities remain very relevant today. Irish regions share the same concerns as our European neighbours, whether it is access to broadband, support for new businesses and SMEs, are the questions of how regions can retain young people and develop sustainable communities, whether in busy urban areas or in rural and peripheral regions. However, with these challenges come opportunities to develop new responses and better ways of working. In seeking to engage local communities in the debate around the future of Europe, the COR has arranged over 180 citizens' debates at the local and regional level. The delegation was proud to support one of the first of these debates in Cork in 2016, and members of the delegation have since taken part in similar local discussions with our COR colleagues in France, Lithuania and Germany. Indeed, I'm due to be in Germany again myself before the end of this month. One common message that has emerged repeatedly is the need to improve our communication about the work and the opportunities of the EU, but also how the EU and Member States can better include local and regional level in the policy-making process, something that Councillor Freehill will touch on also in her intervention. At present, the COR agenda is focused on the proposals for the multi-financial framework in articulating the needs of regions for the next financial period of 2021 to 2027. The COR is working with regions from across Europe, including our own regional assemblies, in demanding that cohesion policy, including the European Regional Development Fund, is stronger, visible and available to every region in the EU in the next funding period. I recently personally had the pleasure to serve on the jury for the European Broadband Awards, which will be presented later this month, assessing the applications. It was clear that in many cases EU regional funding and support was a key driver in increasing access to broadband in rural and peripheral regions, and it is so important that these supports remain available. In Ireland, we now have a unique opportunity to consider how this support at the European level can also be aligned with the development of regional, spatial and economic strategies. Of course, all the future planning must be seen against the background of the UK decision to leave the EU and its possible impact. Within the COR, the Irish delegation has been extremely vocal on the challenges that this poses for our local communities and the need to ensure that adequate planning and support measures are put in place. As the committee saw itself earlier this year in May with the visit of the COR's Conference of Presidents, it is recognised that our regions will face the biggest impact outside of the UK regions. The delegation continues to work with other representatives, Irish representatives in Brussels, to present a coordinated position and to emphasise the difficulties that Brexit poses at the local level and the need to ensure cooperation with Northern Ireland and the UK regions after post-Brexit. As you may be aware, the COR mainly presents its views as detailed written opinions in response to legislative and other proposals from the European Commission or requests from the Council and Parliament. To date, the Irish delegation members have completed 7 opinions, with the 8th by my colleague Councillor Ford scheduled for adoption in December. In line with the priorities outlined above, our members have focused on the issue Our members have focused on issues of interest for Ireland's regional development and our local communities. Councillor Enda Stenson's work on Smart Villages initiative promotes the opportunities for creating sustainable and digitally connected rural communities. Councillor Lundy's opinion on the action plan for a maritime strategy in the Atlantic focuses on how best we can support our maritime communities to maximise the opportunities of the blue economy. Councillor McCarthy has concentrated on the potential of both the digital agenda and the urban agenda to support the development of our towns and cities, while Councillor Ford's opinion on the proposed single market programme considers how the EU can best support our SMEs in the future. My own opinion has considered the impact of EU competition policy on our regions. And of course, I cannot forget our first opinion of the mandate on trade policy, which was completed by Senator Richmond, the then head of the delegation. Chair, my delegation colleagues will be happy to speak on any of these topics in more detail as part of our general discussion, and I will now hand over to my colleague, Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Chairman, Deputies, Senators, as Councillor Murphy has noted, we as a delegation and as members of our regional assemblies, I'm a member of the Southern Regional Assembly, are fully supportive of the Committee of the Regions campaign to ensure that regional development funding remains available to all regions in the EU. Today, Chair, I wish to focus particularly on the proposals for the future of European Territorial Cooperation, ETC, better known as Interreg. As a key support for European regional development, Interreg continues to open up vast possibilities to forge beneficial links across Europe, allow the free flow of knowledge and experience between regions and cities to the profit of all. To give you an overview, Chairman, for the current funding period, Interreg is allocated €10.1 billion distributed across all 28 member states and several non-EU countries. Ireland is involved in 9 cooperation programmes, 3 transnational programmes, 3 cross-border programmes and 2 cooperation programmes. So Interreg programmes have directed hundreds of millions of euros to Ireland. In the current ETC funding, funding has reached in Ireland €169 million, which is an enormous amount of money, Chair. Funds are applied to a huge range of areas, including innovation, entrepreneurship, environment, education, skills, urban regeneration, cultural heritage and rural development. Significantly, Chair, Interreg funds are available to all types of stakeholders, and from city councils to community level. And are one of the most accessible EU funding streams. The Irish regions have had a key role to play in relation to Interreg. Our regional assemblies are contact points advising on application, how to apply for the funds, ETC funds, and also to assess project proposals to ensure high project standards. In addition, the regional assemblies facilitate access to ETC funds by aligning their regional, spatial and economic strategies, which of course align to the broader national planning framework, which has gone through kind of Dáil Éireann over the last few months. However, the uncertainty around future UK participation in Interreg threatens to undermine the current range of programmes in which Irish regions and local authorities are involved, and this is a major concern, Chairman, as we look to the post-2020 period. What is known, and it's proposed that PEACE, the Northern Ireland Reconciliation Programme, will continue as PEACE Plus, expanding its remit to incorporate some of the Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland programme. Beyond this, Mr Chairman, the questions around the future programmes are more concerning. We don't really know yet, I suppose, the potential impact of Brexit on our regions. We appreciate the support of the various committees we're involved in, seeking to ensure that Irish regions and local authorities continue to have access to programmes that relate to our geographic and economic priorities. More broadly, Mr Chairman, post-Brexit, it is imperative that funding be made available and that all county councils, local authorities in the Republic can recruit and expand EU funding teams. In other words, to have an EU funding officer in place for every local authority. If we have heritage officers, arts officers, there should be an EU funding officer. But also it's very important to maximise the potential of the Committee of the Regions, as well in terms of the opinion documents to access best practice solutions and increase awareness of the Irish regions in Europe. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Councillor Friel, who will speak about the outcomes of the recent task force on subsidiarity.
Thank you very much, Ciarán and Chairman and members of the committee. As you are aware, this most recent task force report on subsidiarity, proportionality and doing less more efficiently emerged as a part of the debate around the future of Europe. One of the 3 questions posed by President Juncker at the outset of the task force work was to consider the involvement of local and regional authorities in the preparation and follow-up of the Union's policies. Both Councillor Murphy and McCarthy have mentioned the importance of communication, both in communicating the opportunities of the EU, but also ensuring that there is a mechanism to feed back in the perspectives local communities via the local and regional authorities. This is a key message that can emerges from the report, both in terms of development and preparation of legislation and in terms of assessing the impact of this legislation at the local level. This is not just a challenge for the EU institutions, but it's also for the national level in member states. Surveys of the Irish population show a high level of positivity towards the European Union. But this is not something that should be taken for granted. Ireland's role within the EU is also, will also continue to develop and change as we face into a new budget period as a net contributor and a European Union without the UK as a member. At the local level, we are aware of how certain legislative measures can prove contentious. In this context, the report's recommendation for the European co-legislators to host hearings with local and regional authorities as part of the legislative process is to be welcomed. Similarly, the delegation welcomes the aim of improving the flow of feedback and viewpoints from local and regional authorities through public consultation, questionnaires, and the role that the COR could play in supporting this. The report is sensitive to the fact that different governance structures exist across the member states, and it is important to focus on what is possible within our own local regional government structures in Ireland. As such, I would like to draw your attention to the report's recommendation in relation to the European semester and the need for both the European Commission and the Member States to engage meaningfully with local and regional authorities in the semester process. At present, the delegation is consulted in the preparation of the National Reform Programme, but we would argue that there is considerable scope to intensify this engagement. As mentioned previously, the 3 regional assemblies are currently developing their regional, spatial and economic strategies. These strategies will provide the link between national planning framework and county-level planning. Members of the committee will be aware, and recent Eurostat research confirms that disparities continue to exist at regional level in Ireland. This regional structure provides a new opportunity for Ireland to be more actively involved, our regions and local authorities, in preparation of the National Reform Programme. Such engagement would also present an opportunity to increase awareness around the importance of the European semester process more widely throughout the country. Our attendance here today is a positive example of how we can share information and experience, and the delegation hopes that we continue to build on this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and could I thank you, the 3 of you, for your opening remarks. And could I first of all go to Senator Neil Richmond?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Absolutely delighted to welcome the delegation back to Leinster House and appreciate the 3 speakers' contribution and a series of key areas. And I kind of wanted to pick up mainly on an issue, given the day that's in it, that Councillor McCarthy, you raised. And I note that I think pretty much every single one of you is a member of the Brexit Interregional Group in the COR, which no doubt has a vital role to play. And I appreciate from experience the strong relationship with members of the COR from Northern Ireland with the delegation from Ireland, and how powerful that is, particularly as the 2 who tend to be from unionist communities. But I suppose it's looking towards the future, and never mind what happens today or whatever deal will happen. I suppose it's the potential for within the Committee of the Regions in terms of pushing the agenda of furthering Ireland's ties with the rest of Europe. And this is something that's going to become increasingly important, and we've already seen it in areas like logistics, where We're opening up new shipping lanes into Santander, into Rotterdam, into Zeebrugge, into Dijsselburg, as well as energy connectivity with the Celtic interconnector going from France into Cork. But I suppose it's on a local and regional level, and once upon a time in county councils we were talking about twinning, and then during the, I suppose, austerity areas, twinning got a bad reputation. And then we see the importance of it and the potential for it. And there was many historic reasons why my old local authority was twinned with Holyhead and Cherbourg in France, which made sense when a ferry actually used to leave Dunleary, but it doesn't anymore. And essentially there's no real twinning going on with any other European member states, no active twinning, despite the fact that we are, Dunleary Town, not only is it a very historic area, but it has a huge major commercial hub, both with the Sandyford Business District as well as Dundrum Town Centre. And I suppose my question in a roundabout way is, how can the Committee of the Regions best encourage local authorities in Ireland to engage with the other remaining 26 member states to develop these new twinning associations between both our towns and our counties, as well as a regional link? It makes absolute sense, some of the relationships held with American cities or whatever else, but there has to be so much more, and there needs to be so much more. And I think, Chairman, Councillor Murphy detailed the amount of travel he's been doing, and I know that is the same for every single one of the 9 full members and 9 alternate members, and how important that is and how much potential there is. Europe is so much closer than we think. But if we look at Horizon 20 and Erasmus Plus, the deep roots of future relationships between our third-level institutions and our civic society with European partners can and will come from our local authorities. It won't come from central government. It won't come from the agencies like Lergus who implement these programmes. It has to come from, hopefully, the European officers, Councillor Murphy's, that you mentioned, and I'd hope that the local authorities in turn put real resources behind European engagement officers at a local authority level, and not just saying, well, so-and-so is designated as a European engagement officer even though they've 17 other million jobs to be doing. I think there's great potential there, Chairman, and I'd just like if the delegation could tease that out a bit.
Thanks very much. Now, before we, but we'll take another couple of questions. Vice Chairman Senator Terry Leyden, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our colleagues in the Committee of the Regions, and to thank you for your work and the Committee of the Regions. And this is a great opportunity for the fact that it's been live streamed here today, the fact that you can get copies of your report here today and your contributions to the meeting, and it allows you to show what you're doing in Europe, in fact, because, as you know, it's very hard to get that message across with respect to the media. There's so many things happening at the moment that it's very hard for them to concentrate on your work as well as other issues. And indeed, we're kind of in a vacuum today because it's such a historical day today. The British Cabinet are meeting at 10 Downing Street at the moment as we speak, and their decision is absolutely vital as far as the Brexit discussions are concerned. I would be optimistic that the Cabinet will agree to these terms, which I believe are quite good from the point of view of the United Kingdom, and likewise, what's good for the United Kingdom, quite frankly, is going to be good for us too, because it's vital that they get a good deal. And that's, I think, all our diplomats have worked very hard, and the government have worked very hard. And I suppose it's a totally united approach here in Ireland, certainly in the Republic of Ireland, in relation to the talks. The government had the full support of all opposition parties, independents, everyone else, that we get the best deal. We're singing from the one hymn sheet. We have the green jersey on. And as well as that, as you know from your work in Europe, you realise the diplomatic support representing Ireland. I think the top diplomats, from the ambassador to all his staff in Brussels, have been working extremely close with Mr Barnier to get the best possible deal. And they're very conscious of that, and we're fortunate in having that type of relationship. But from your point of view, from the point of view of the Committee of the Regions, there will be a change from end of March, one way or another, which is they are leaving the European Union. And by the way, I don't see any likelihood of another referendum. Most contacts we've had at this committee, we've travelled quite extensively with the COSAC and other issues in Britain, the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly. From all sides, really, quite frankly, they're going to make the best of what they have and what the people decided. I think going back will be fraught with danger. I don't see it happening. So the next step will be the British government will put it to the Parliament, and if the Parliament agrees, which I hope they will, and the Taoiseach announced today as well that the Dáil will have a say as well as a final agreement, but they will be guided by the recommendation of the diplomats and the government as well. Just to say as well, what's very important after these negotiations are completed, that we have direct access to the land bridge through the United Kingdom into mainland Europe, because that's the fastest way, irrespective of direct links to mainland Europe. It's the quickest way to get our product on the markets in Europe through the tunnel and through land bridge. So I've been involved with the National College of Ireland in devising technologies that would bring about a possible seamless transfer of goods from the Republic straight through Europe, straight through Britain, without obstruction. That's what we're working on. In fact, we're meeting the Customs Excise tomorrow to put forward a proposal, and I'm sure that other people are working on this. So the more people work on these solutions, the better, because there are solutions to these from a technological point of view of knowing what goods are on the trucks going through the land bridge, and that there will prevent all delays. That's absolutely. We can't have fresh meat from Keepack and Atleague being held up in Dover waiting to go abroad. So there's a lot of work to be done. Just finally to say as well that your work now will be intensified in a sense, because I see the Committee of the Regions having a particular interest in Northern Ireland, that you will be there to represent their views, because they will not be there, because the Committee of the Region representatives from Northern Ireland are gone, as well as the MEPs. So I think that your work will be extended, and I hope that you will be properly funded, your activities in Europe for the future, because of the additional responsibilities you will have. Just want to ask a question to Michael in relation to Michael Murphy, Councillor Murphy. In relation to the broadband situation, you said in your report and your contribution that support is forthcoming from the regional funding for the broadband for rural areas. So maybe you could just elaborate slightly on that, because, as you know, at the moment they're waiting a report on the negotiations going on in relation to the extension of broadband in rural areas. And by the way, I think the best people in a position to do that are DSB and possibly Air Board of One. State companies are required, and I would say if ever was one of the big, I suppose, regrets I have is that Aircom was ever sold to the private sector. And we never needed more than we need it now, but that's life. And by the way, if I was in a position of power, I would be buying back shares in Air. I would actually buy that company back and take over the infrastructure they have. In the long term, it would be the way to do it, because they have the structure, they have the infrastructure to provide broadband in rural areas, and along with that, DSB have also similar type, and the technology has improved, because one time you couldn't put the broadband wiring on the VSP, but now things have changed slightly in that particular. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming today. And by the way, we've had regular meetings really with the Committee of the Regions, and I want to say to our Chairman and to our Secretariat that I hope we'll continue with these more so now than in the past, because we'll be more in discussions with the outcome of the Brexit discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I just want to welcome Deputy Mattie McGrath, who was tied up earlier chairing another meeting, and to apologise for Deputy Frank O'Rourke, who had to leave on Dáil business, and he offers his apologies for having to leave. So, Mr McCarthy, could we go to you for an initial response, if that's okay?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. And can I just compliment, to begin with, Senator Richmond's work, and he was a member of the Committee of the Regions and a very effective member, and I'm delighted that he's also a strong member actually here. There's Monday night, yeah, Mr Chairman, it was fantastic.
He was not good, he was excellent.
Yeah, definitely. There's much to learn, Mr Chairman, from Europe. I mean, we are councillors put in a position where we've had to learn about European policies. We've been kind of projected from the ground to the top. So we're trying to develop what I call a bottom-up process, that it can't be just all top-down thinking from the EU Commission or from the EU Commissioners. And there's many opportunities to mine. So I've only mentioned EU Funding Officer and Interreg. But from my perspective, and many of the members here represent the Committee of the Regions, we deputise for the Committee of the Regions regions in cities and regions across Europe. So all of a sudden we have to put on an EU hat that I can't put on a Cork City Council hat. But I'm on the e-government steering board, and we're doing a lot on kind of developing some sort of a smart Europe, developing smart cities, developing digital kind of devices, yes, looking at broadband, but also cities need the infrastructure as well, and the G kind of technology. I mean, apart from Interreg, we've got Horizon 2020. Ireland has one of the most successful rates of acquiring Horizon 2020 funding in the EU, and the success rate is something like 6%, and Ireland's well ahead. I'm involved in the European Entrepreneurial Region Award, which I know in your neck of the woods down in Tralee, they were involved in developing an Interreg programme, and they were very successful, and they were actually part of the Secretariat driving the Interreg programme. I'm also involved in the EU Urban Agenda, where I have to oversee the 12 action plans. So they're trying to develop these action plans, everything from employment action plans to, for example, housing action plans. And recently my council actually was over, I brought my council, my city council to the EU Parliament, and we met the European Investment Bank. And we tried to, the European Investment Bank outlined what they could do for my council and what they couldn't do for the council. I know that there are certain bodies in my city that have drawn down funding from the EIB because of our interaction with the EIB, and also cities like Limerick as well. Things like, I suppose, the new skills agenda, which is discussed in other committees here. The European capital programmes. I'm a member of the jury of the European Capital of Volunteering. There's sports, youth. We've got Galway in 2 years' time with the culture. But there's also European Capitals of Innovation. So it's more than just twinning. There are so many opportunities we're trying to mine down into, deep dive down into. There's also the opinions themselves are like huge toolkits for how we actually advance our cities and regions. And even from a rural development perspective, we're actually championing, there is a thing called Cork 2.0, developing a better life in rural regions, and that we try to make sure that our rural regions are actually looked after. So it's not probably just one or two elements that we're actually looking at. We're deep diving down into 14, 15 elements at any one time and trying to get the best out of that. And we're, in one sense, we're doing a good job, but we need more support as well, and to get the message out there as much as possible. Look, that all these opportunities are available.
Okay, Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Just to thank Senator Layden and Senator Richmond for their interventions, and I echo. I want to congratulate, commend Senator Richmond and the excellent work he's doing as chair of the Oireachtas Brexit Committee, and indeed to commend this committee, because it is a coordinated approach in terms of particularly the first phase, which was creating an awareness throughout the EU 27 of the unique challenges that we face here in Ireland. You know, it's a coordinated approach from the point of view of heads of state, this committee, our MEPs, our national government, and of course us as members of the Committee of Regions at a sub-national level. And I think it's really, really important as well to highlight the incredible work that's been done by our Perm representation in Brussels as well, that keep us all very well briefed. I can assure this committee that we as members of the Committee of the Regions are very, very active within the Committee of the Regions, within our political groups, within our commissions, and of course the wider committee as well. We've adopted a number of resolutions, and thanks to the members of the Irish delegation. The Irish concerns around protecting the Good Friday Agreement, in terms of the challenges we face from a trade perspective, given the level of trade intensity that many of our regions have with the UK, that these are front and central of those two resolutions. As you would know, I was here with the Conference of Presidents in May of this year. We've engaged as a delegation directly with Mr. Barnier, so we're very, very active in terms of creating that awareness. But of course we've moved beyond that now, and it's about finding solutions, notwithstanding the fluid nature of where we are at the moment, the developments in the last 24 hours. We as members of the Committee of the Regions have brought our knowledge back to our local authorities. We've introduced debate debate within our county councils around Brexit, not just notice emotions around, you know, the normal day-to-day challenges that we face at a local level in terms of investment, roads, water services. We've brought Brexit into the chamber of our local authorities, and I think our local authorities have reacted. I know Tipperary County Council now are very, very active in terms of Brexit seminars, you know, working closely with our local enterprise offices, and I highlighted that the last day I was here, the key role that our local enterprise offices have to play and the supports that national government has provided our local enterprise offices with, and those supports, you know, it's so important that as many businesses, as many SMEs as possible are aware of those supports and use those supports to improve their competitiveness, to finance attendance at trade shows, to improve their online presence as well, because that's as much as we can do at the moment. I had a Brexit dialogue myself down in Clonmel in the last 2 months. We had 300 representatives from, it was in collaboration with the local Chamber of Commerce, 300 representatives from the business and agri centre. So we're very, very active in bringing that debate at European level back into the chambers of our local authorities. We prepared at COR level a territorial impact assessment, which very much mirrored the Copenhagen's report commissioned by our own government, that Irish regions will be the regions most impacted. And of course those sectors, the agri-food sector, the machinery sector, the wholesale sector, the medical device and pharma sectors. So there's a lot of work and a lot of good work being done, but really at the moment it's about creating that awareness, highlighting the important role that our local enterprise offices have to play. Just on broadband, Senator, it's a really, really good question, and you know, there's been a lot of talk about broadband. Everybody in this room is very well aware of broadband in terms of a driver of economic growth in rural and peripheral regions, and you know, broadband as high-speed sustainable broadband as an enabler of, you know, distance working, you know, people being able to work at home rather than commuting to our large urban centres. In terms of the current national broadband plan, there is, you know, significant portion of ERDF funding promised. I think I thought the figure was 75 million, but my colleague tells me it could actually be more than 75 million. But I just make an interesting point on broadband, and there's been a lot of delays around the national broadband plan. I think, and it was something I really highlighted in my opinion on competition policy, we definitely need greater flexibility in state aid rules when it comes to the rollout of broadband, because let's go back to when it was launched, the national broadband plan 2011-2012. It was so difficult to define a map, an intervention map on the one hand, and at the same time technological advances are so fluid, you know, so it's really something we need greater flexibility in the whole area, the application of state aid rules. Hopefully that's a lesson learned, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Deputy Durkan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome our delegation and compliment them on the work that they're doing in liaising with their colleagues in Europe and the importance of that work. I think it needs to be emphasised that it is hugely important for parliamentarians and for local authority members right across Europe to interact with each other in order to be up to speed on what affects them in their own place. And that gives them an opportunity as well, and I know that you're doing this, to draw comparisons. And instead of isolating yourselves from the rest of Europe and withdrawing into respective corners, you did the opposite. And I think the Committee of the Region in general has done tremendous work in bringing to the attention of all the authorities the importance of equal participation and cooperation. The benefits of remaining in have been well and truly discussed here and elsewhere, and I'm sure amongst your groups as well. Maybe we have come to realise the importance of what we have and what we've got, and possibly we also have come to recognise the cost at which we achieved what we did achieve. It didn't come overnight. It wasn't simple. It came over a long number of years and with huge cost. And Europe that we have today, presented to us, is a far cry from the Europe of 1945, when previous experiments had gone wrong. and the price had to be paid by an awful lot of people, millions of people. So I think that it's no harm to reflect on that now. It's also no harm in the context of the debate that we've had over the past couple of years. The importance of the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland and their importance to each other. Not by way of overcoming one another, not by way of subsuming one another, but in cooperation, in joint activity, in trade and commerce, and in moving as a single unit. And that has, as you know, has been the feature of the debate to date, and hopefully that will continue to be the case. So I think that in order to be truly representative of the island of Ireland, we here in this part of the island have to be absolutely familiar with the concerns of our colleagues in Northern Ireland, and also have to be equally committed to ensuring that the Good Friday Agreement, to the spirit and the letter, continues in place uninterrupted. I think as well it's a time for reflection on the degree to which we have cooperated in the past with our colleagues across the Irish Sea, and the importance of that economic entity as it is, and the travel, and the common travel area. We hope, Mr. Chairman, that as a result of recent discussions, that the future in that area is guaranteed. We sincerely hope so. But even if there's a temporary hiccup, I believe that wiser heads will prevail eventually, and that it will come to pass that those who foresaw a Europe from the ashes of the past and looked into the future and made the sacrifices that were necessary and made the commitments that are necessary, I think that we will reap the rewards of their foresight and their thinking. One last thing, Mr. Chairman, and it is this. There are challenges all over the globe now. I have always had the feeling that every 100 years or so, the population across the globe becomes restive, and they begin to look at each other and to covet each other and to wonder how better they can get on at the other's expense. These discordant notes are arising throughout Europe and throughout the world at the present time. They are not consistent with peace and cooperation and peaceful coexistence. And in the past, on every occasion that kind of discordant activity arose, there was a huge price to be paid, and everybody paid for it. So we hope that you have been, and we compliment you for it, have been doing your part in order to ensure that those discordant and unhelpful voices are not necessarily confronted, but are at least addressed in a way that makes them hesitate and ponder on where they might go next. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very, very much, Senator Paul Coughlin.
Thank you, Chair. I too very much welcome you here today and salute the work you are doing. And I just jotted down a few things from your words, Michael. I'd be interested to hear more from you on your engagement at local level regarding this all-consuming topic of Brexit. You mentioned the rise in populism, and again, I'd be interested in hearing, how do you find that in your communities? And is it a matter you're going to have to be all dealing with individually in upcoming elections next year? You mentioned villages, and I often think, you know, we have some beautiful villages, but generally, as compared to some of the villages in places like the Cotswolds and other places in France, we're lacking, and I'd love to hear from you on that. I think as a government we need to be doing more to assist maybe the local authorities in regard to further improvements of villages. Now, and also, you have links, obviously, with other authorities throughout the continent, and I'd like to hear more from you in regard to dealings with those umbrella bodies that presumably you're dealing with. And Terry here mentioned Dover-Calais. You know, it was amazing that only the other day the UK Brexit Secretary for the first time seemed to discover how important Dover-Calais was. My God, they were going to back up to London when the French had closed it on the other side. I mean, this was crazy. I mean, but for us, 80% of our exports to continental Europe, as you know, go through Dover-Calais. They have to go through Welsh and British ports first, but it goes on then the land bridge. So that's absolutely vital. And look, we'll be hearing more, I suppose, as today and tomorrow and the next week goes on, and hopefully we have to live in hope, but we also have to plan for the downside. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I want to go to a few people who haven't spoken yet. So, Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a great pleasure to be here and to listen to the words of wisdom. It's great to have the communication, a two-way flow. And you mentioned there that how important it is to be able to counteract negativity in relation to the EU and even ourselves at local level. Deirdre Clune and myself had the first grassroots engagement in Cork there in July actually. Unfortunately, it was the hottest time of the year and it's not easy to bring people to a public meeting. But the thought struck me that they were delighted to be asked for their opinion on what they liked about the EU and what they didn't like about the EU. And to a man, they wanted stability, which is fine. And obviously they were all concerned about Brexit and justice and social cohesion. And I was able to relay that back to the EU. And as a result, I was asked to speak in Helsinki there a week ago. And they wanted specifically to know what we were doing about climate action in Cork and what we needed from the EU to help us, not just in Cork, obviously, but for the whole country. And I think that it's very significant that there are specific issues of concern to us that we can hone in on. As well as that, I do think some local authorities are at the starting gate of communication about the supports from the European Union. And I think others maybe just have to do a little homework. And I think that's where we come in, that we are now discussing the RSESs with the regional authority. And as well as that, we can articulate that the government is putting a lot of funding in conjunction with the EU and that the supports should be disseminated through the regional assemblies down into the local authorities. And if we're not at the starting gate, we're going to lose out because the money will follow the policy. In short, I think we should be having these dialogues more and more because they teach us and they learn from us and we learn from them. And it also breaks down barriers because in my experience since I went on the Committee of the Regions, the small businessman, the teacher, the guard and so on in every country is the same. They want peace and stability and jobs. And going back to the local authorities and their issue about going to China and going to the US to build contacts for jobs and businesses, we have to look more in the European region now and try and match up our businesses in particular with businesses in the other 27 member states. And we'll continue to do that. Thank you.
Very much, Councillor. Councillor Jerry Lundy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, it's a great pleasure to be here in front of this committee and to hear the comments from the members here. It's working with the Committee of the Regions. We're addressing a lot of the issues that you have already mentioned, like broadband and Brexit and so on. And on the committee, we're working as a team, an Irish team out there, representing our country, but also speaking on behalf of our regional assemblies and our local county councils, and on issues that are relevant to, say, the councils and to the local authorities and the regional authorities. We're given updates on a regular basis of what we're at and the work we're doing there. But some of the issues in relation to, we say, that the Vice Chairman, Senator Layden brought in, broadband is a huge issue. It's a huge issue in rural areas. And I had the great opportunity of bringing in an opinion which was called the Atlantic Strategy, a mid-term review of it, creating sustainable jobs in the coastal regions. And we have seen, not just in Ireland and the coastal regions of Ireland, but we have seen in coastal regions throughout Europe, young people drifting into the major urban areas. And during the process of that research that I was doing, we discovered that every year, 50 million people are moving from rural areas to urban areas. So much so that by 2050, the United Nations predict that 68% of the world population will live in cities. And this is really unsustainable going forward. So we're trying to do on the committee and through my opinion, which is now adopted by the Committee of the Regions, trying to create sustainable communities in coastal regions, in island regions and in outermost regions. And if the young people continue, because of lack of broadband and because of lack of good infrastructure and so on, continue to drift into urban areas and cities, we're going to lose the heritage in these coastal regions, our folklore, possibly our language, our skills. And if that happens, then all of the other services that were there, like the schools, the football clubs, the post offices and so on, they're going to close, and we're going to have a whole generation that has been removed from these areas. It's not just like where I come from in Sligo, it's not just affecting us, but regions in France and in Spain and in Portugal. It's happening also in Scotland and in Wales. And of course, we're going to lose the UK, which is one of the great maritime nations. We're going to lose its skills in boat building and all that in the EU. And this is going to create huge problems for us. I see it as living in Sligo, which is a border county. I see the problems that Brexit is going to have right there, because so many of our people cross the border into Enniskillen working. People from Enniskillen come to Sligo, Hamilton and so on working. And also for cross-border health issues. It's where I live in Tubbercurry, I'm exactly halfway between Enniskillen and Galway. And so many people now are going to Enniskillen, to the new hospital there, to access health services. This is going to create problems again going forward, you know. So just thanks for some of your comments, and I think that you know, as an island nation, north and south, like you said, we have to work with our friends in the north. We have to work together, and hopefully the news that comes on Brexit will be good for the country.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Deputy Seán Haughey, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I thank the delegation for coming in here this afternoon? I think it's very important that we would have this dialogue. And to thank you for the work that you're doing in pushing forward the Irish issues in the context of Brexit and the people that you meet in the course of your work, and to thank you for the reports which you have outlined for us here this afternoon. I think the Committee of the Regions, you probably will agree, is an institution that maybe the citizens know least about of all the European institutions, so we do need to have you up there and to get more recognition for the work that you do and the important work that you do. Just in relation to the multi-annual financial framework which was mentioned in the course of your presentations, unless I'm mistaken, there was no reference to CAP. And I would have thought that the future of CAP is extremely important for the regions and extremely important for this country in particular as well. I know the Taoiseach has said that we intend to increase our contribution to the European Union funding, so all these issues obviously have to be sorted out, but perhaps you would confirm your position in relation to CAP. I suppose just a general question in relation to regional and local government generally. Again, in the course of your work and your interaction with other delegations from throughout the European Union, would you consider local and regional government very poor in this country? Is there a need for reform? Is there a need to give it an enhanced status? Now, I do accept that we are a small country compared to some of the big EU states and their populations, but presumably you would say that there is much more that regional and local government can be doing in the interests of the citizens. And just as regards the future of Europe, okay, I know the European Commission President has put forward the various scenarios, but just to broaden the debate and to take up the point that my colleague Deputy Durkan mentioned, obviously immigration is one of the big issues facing the European Union, not so much this nation state, but other nation states, and as a result of that you have the populism and the rise of the far right and so on, and a decline in European liberal democratic values. I think that's one of the biggest threats to the European Union at this time, and the future of Europe. I'm wondering, have you come across that in the course of your work? Does it impact ye in the course of your work, the Committee of the Regions? How is that affecting the work that you do? And indeed, how can you indeed counteract that? Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Mattie McGrath, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for being delayed and thanks for accepting them. I too am delighted to welcome our guests here today and all the members, and indeed thank them for the work that they've done on a continuous basis. And a lot of it is culminating, I suppose, at this point in time with what we're expecting from the Cabinet meeting across the waters. But I'd just like to refer, and I'd be parochial if you allow me, Chair, I'm not like doing that. I know all the councils and all the members have done huge work, but just to compliment my local man in Cullinane, Councillor Murphy, on his leading role, and also, you know, the work that he does on continuous basis there, on his own behalf in the County Council for his constituents, but also on the Committee of the Regions. And the very valuable work he's done, and the fact that he has organised a wonderful seminar, like Councillor Ford said, I think that here we're in Cork. He waited till the weather got a bit cooler, but he had a full house anyway, and he had Minister Coveney as the guest, and along with the Chamber of Clonmel, and I know there was a very positive feedback from that. And, you know, because many of us are preaching and talking about Brexit for so long, this was consultative and engaging with the very people that are affected, the business people, and asked them how they might be affected and in what way they felt it would impact. And I know it was very beneficial, and I got excellent feedback from it myself, even though I wasn't able to attend. But that's very important. Not a dim in us, and we talk about him, that he bottoms-up approach, and sat down, consulted, and had the Minister, you know, dealing with it on a daily basis, an hourly basis at this stage, or 24-hourly basis at this stage, Minister Coveney. I think that's very important, and there's great feedback from it. And only time will tell, I suppose, as to what will happen, and it's very anxious times, as I know. I look forward to meeting with the Taoiseach later on this evening for a briefing on behalf of our group chair. You also mentioned the Competition Authority in your report, Councillor Murphy, and maybe, and I know you replied to some of the questions already, but maybe you could expand on how what you meant when you said you felt that, you know, a lot of things could change and there could be a better appreciation of how fast things evolve and have evolved with the internet and with, you know, all the social media. Maybe you could expand on how you think, because we are in a bit of a sticky wicket now with the broadband, as we know. We're 10-15 years too late, but I mean, you obviously have an insight into it there and your views on how we could maybe, you might be able to expand more on what you meant by that. And as I said, you know, with the national broadband policy, so I think your committee has been very beneficial. I think you've done excellent work, and it's very important because you're at the local level and you understand business. And I know you do, Councillor Murphy, well, been involved in your day-to-day job and very important business in Tipperary. So I welcome you one and all and thank you all. But as I said, sorry for being a bit parochial, but I wanted to say that on the record at the House that the work he does in Tipperary is appreciated by the Council and the Chief Executive and by the members, and above all by the business people in Tipperary.
Thank you very much, Deputy McGrath. And now could I go to Councillor Jerry Murray, who hasn't contributed yet.
Yeah, thank you, Cathaoirleach. Look, and it's great to come here before the Oireachtas members and basically just flag up some of the issues that are facing all of the regions of Europe. And sometimes we think that in rural Ireland that we're in isolation. In fact, many of the regions throughout Europe are facing greater and bigger challenges than actually rural Ireland are. And you have a situation where entire towns and villages have emptied out in Spain, in France, in Bulgaria, etc. And you know, we've met the people from those communities and the officials, and they just say to you, it's a whole litany of small cuts, police stations closing, Garda State or police stations closing, post offices, banks, shops. But it comes into a tipping point, and one official described it basically as a run on the banks. It's hard to imagine that a vibrant community could die so quickly, and that's what's happening. And for example, post-2020, all of the northwest region, huge tracts of rural France and rural Spain will be a region in transition. That means that all the stats are saying that these rural regions aren't progressing, we're going backwards. And particularly in terms of the northwest, where I come from, the only thing that's keeping us from going back to Objective 1 status is some of the profits from multinationals that are repatriated here in Ireland and are basically over-inflating our GDP per capita in the northwest region. Otherwise, we would be back at Objective 1 status. So we have a very serious crisis in rural Ireland, and as Councillor Lundy referred to it, the demographic is changing dramatically. There's a huge flight from the land, and there's a very poor take-up in terms of young farmers taking on their family homesteads and continuing on the tradition of farming. And as Deputy Haughey said, CAP is crucial in relation to all of that. But the feedback we're getting from the regions in Europe is you can have CAP, and you can have tourism, and you can have leader, and all of these initiatives, but they're not really sufficient to reverse the decline. And really, what the rural regions need is a front loading of infrastructure in order to attract investment and employment. To a very large degree, tourism is the icing on the cake. In Ireland, it only represents 5% of GDP. So I think we need to ensure that the policy is addressing the other 95%. And for that reason, we have encountered problems where basically you meet some of the officials in Brussels, and they're quite happy to front load money into the regions, but only in circumstances where the respective nation states are prepared to match it. And unfortunately, right across Europe, a lot of the nation states aren't prepared to step up to the plate in terms of matching funding, and that's an issue that maybe the Oireachtas members could deal with here. A case in point would be Deputy or Senator Leyden referred to a land bridge to the UK. Well, in the West, we have the Western Rail Corridor. Half it is open and the other half is closed. But that's basically a low-carbon, tariff-free, low-cost route right into Waterford Port and all the way out into the European mainland to a market of 500 million people. And that was nominated for T10 funding in 2011. The government took it off the agenda in 2014. Despite the fact that you had 50–60% grant aid for that particular initiative coming from Europe. I would hope that when the current review starts of the T10 in 2020, that maybe the Oireachtas members here might lobby to ensure that that section of the WRC is put back onto the T10 for funding. Basically, the reason why that funding is available is that rail transport is regarded as a low-carbon transport initiative. It basically ties into climate change, etc. A lot of the multinationals in Mayo, the fact that, and in Galway, the fact that the UK will no longer be a common transit area post-Brexit, are obviously looking at alternative routes to the European market, and the Western Rail Corridor all the way from Sligo and out via Waterford Port and Cork Port is an obvious alternative, but obviously that needs to be get funding, and the only way it can get funding is by this nation state here nominating it as a project as part of the T10. So in terms of what the Oireachtas members can do, come 2020 maybe to lobby to have that put back in the T10 for funding in circumstances where there's 50% funding coming from Europe and the nation state here matching that. The other big issue is broadband. There's a very serious deficit in rural Ireland, and Councillor Murphy referred to the various state aid regs that are basically impeding the rollout of broadband. It's very hard for private utilities to embark on major broadband rollout in circumstances where you have acute low economies of scale. And sometimes when we're out at the Committee of the Regions and we're being given briefings, we're being told that Luxembourg or other governments are actively engaged in rolling out broadband, and they don't seem to be impeded by either competition law or state aid law. So I think that's something that we will be looking at here on the Committee of the Regions to see why some countries can take that latitude in terms of broadband fibre, i.e. the respective governments or local governments rolling out the broadband, and here we're told that it is an impediment. So for all of those reasons, it's very important that we do have this engagement, that you know the impediments that we're facing out in Europe, and that basically you know here that in terms of your role as Oireachtas members, you can bring pressure to bear on regardless of who's in government, to ensure that major critical infrastructure projects are nominated in the regions in order to achieve balanced regional development. And in circumstances with a significant match in funding from Europe, there's really no excuse for our nation state here not to nominate major critical infrastructure out in our rural regions.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Freehill.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's nice to be able to come back in again, and I very much appreciate the opportunity of regional, local government interacting, with the committee here, because a lot of questions really were made in that direction, particularly Deputy Haughey and Durkan, about what our experiences were in relation to comparisons, we'll say, of local government in Ireland and regional government in Ireland and the rest of Europe. And I have to say, when I went there in the 90s, it was a huge eye-opener to me to realise that in actual fact, Ireland, below Leinster House, has the lowest level of participation in the democratic world, because the structures at regional and local government are so weak in Ireland. And I think an example of that, would be the fact that in Ireland we spend about 7.5% of GNP at local government level. If you take Scandinavia, it's 33% at local government level. So that kind of demonstrates the difference. And in fact, even we as members of the Committee of the Regions are participating in opinions in relation to areas that we don't even have a competency at local government level here. And I'll give you an example: education, policing, health, social welfare, water, and indeed major funding for local government infrastructural projects, and they are all administered, and they are all under the administration of local and regional governments there. At regional government here, regional assembly, we only have the power to comment, but we don't have the power to make decisions. So the power lies in your hands here, gentlemen, to a certain extent, and it would be pity and it would be remiss of us not to make that point today, because in actual fact, many of you mentioned about the discord in Europe at the moment, and it's one that concerns all of us greatly. But, subsidiarity is bottom up and top down. And, really, the best way to keep and maintain peace is to involve the citizen and to make sure that the citizen knows what's going on. And that is why, in a way, they probably don't know all that much about what's going on in Europe, because it doesn't permeate right down to the citizen. And therefore, there are a lot of initiatives that could be taken that could actually strengthen local government in Ireland, and I think it would make for a much better society if, in fact, the citizen had an opportunity of being involved and that local government were involved. And maybe this is a big role for the Senate. In the sense that I think the Senate are always so willing and so open to look at opportunities, that I'm well aware that Leinster House is very busy. You don't have time to, you have a very, very heavy workload. But there are many areas I'm perfectly sure that the Senate could be given power to start initiating, like waste management, like noise, like estate management, all of those areas that every other country or local authority has competencies in these areas. In Ireland, we are way, way behind in terms of that kind of democracy. So just pity not to use today's visit here to highlight and to point out all of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Yes.
Quick point. Just in relation to the relationship between your work as Committee of the Regions and the assemblies. Now, obviously most of you are members of the assemblies, but do you find the assembly as a kind of a forum to bring your reports back from Committee of the Regions to the assemblies? And maybe, Chair, we might maybe invite some of the assemblies to come and meet the committee, because I feel the European Affairs Committee is a committee that embraces European affairs and regard the assemblies as basically European institutions, in a sense, Irish institutions linked to Europe. And you're the kind of liaison officers for the three regions. as far as I can see. And I think maybe, quite frankly, see, the media, with respect to them, they can't afford anymore the type of coverage they had when Councillor Fredo was saying there, when she was there before. In the past, when you went to a regional meeting, or you got the coverage, but the local papers just haven't got the staffing or the funding. And the local radios are okay, but they really rely on press releases and so on and so on. So I'm just thinking maybe this would be a good forum for the assemblies to come in and give their views of where they're going at the moment and what's their future in relation to the new Europe under the Brexit and so on and so on.
Very quick one. Mr. Chairman, the reference was made there, I think, by Jerry Murray in relation to rural Ireland and the reduction in the population. I think, that stems from economics. Economically, the experts will tell you that you can provide services for 100,000 people in a very small space, whereas you can't do that in a widespread rural area. That's not necessarily true, because there are other consequences as well from packing the population into too small a space that we unfortunately have to deal with. But Professor Caulfield over in Galway was a great supporter of the concept of retaining a population in rural Ireland. And as we all know, being members of local authorities from time to time, and we have all served our time there, it has been becoming more and more difficult to retain the population in rural Ireland because of policies at local authority level, again springing from economics, which I've already referred to. And I think all local authorities should play the role there. Once the population dwindles in rural Ireland, so goes the services as well. The services of schools, the services in relation to police stations, the services in relation to post offices, in relation to banks, everything. So it is hugely important and essential that we retain an upcoming population, a young population in rural Ireland. Modern methods of travel and modern technology and broadband and so on and so forth are required to assist, but they are and can be complementary in that situation to give an equal quality of life to people living in rural Ireland to that in the centre of New York, and better.
Thank you very much. Now we'll have the final closing comments from each one of you and the delegation that wish to. So, Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Just maybe to come back in on a couple of points, particularly Senator Coughlin's point about the rise of populism and that disconnect between the citizen and the European Union. And certainly what I feel, and when I knock on doors, and I try and knock on doors as often as I can, citizens are always preoccupied with what they perceive as national issues, job security, infrastructural deficits, be it in broadband, roads. And the irony is the European Union plays such a key role in addressing those concerns, and it's convincing the citizen and communicating to the citizen at every opportunity that important role, whether it is funding, like for example I mentioned the national broadband earlier on, funding from the ERDF, funding from the European Regional Fund. And actually I met the Commissioner on Monday and we talked about LEADER. And if I had 10 organisations in front of me and those 10 organisations had received funding from LEADER, not one, or certainly very few of them, would realise the actual origin of LEADER funding. I'm often critical that local authorities, they're well able to hand out LEADER funding, but don't too often make that link between the European Union and LEADER. So it's incumbent on us all at subnational level, and particularly us as members of the Committee of the Regions, to communicate that positive message in terms of the role that the European Union plays in concerns that they perceive as just concerns that only national governments can address. Just one other point, Deputy McGrath mentioned competition policy. It's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, in terms of, and again, coming back to the citizen, one of the real benefits of our European membership has been access to the single market, and DG Competition has been really effective in ensuring fair and effective competition. but I'm often critical in terms of when it comes to addressing that infrastructural deficit that has arisen as a consequence of the financial crisis, and we have a big gap to bridge in the coming years, that we do need greater flexibility in the application of state aid rules. And I believe there are solutions to the crisis we have in terms of the National Broadband Plan, but they will require greater flexibility of state aid rules, and indeed the role of Comreg as well. Just a comment on CAP. Look, there's a real challenge, a real lot of debate in terms of the multi-annual financial framework. You know, the challenges insofar as no contribution now from the UK, and challenges, other challenges, migration, security, but the Irish delegation has been very consistent in calling for the maintenance and, you know, the preservation of the CAP budget. I know 6% cut promised. There are some good measures within CAP in terms of greater flexibility for member states, measures for young farmers. But as my coordinator here pointed out, we're due to debate the whole area CAP at our December plenary, and I can assure Sean that we will be very, very active in that whole debate around CAP and calling for CAP to be maintained. I'll hand over to you. Perfect.
Oh, yes, thank you very much, Chair. Very brief. Michael stole my thunder about telling you that we are going to debate CAP at the plenary, and we are going to make sure that we have the proper promotions from an Irish perspective at that debate. Second thing I'd like to say is, through my opinion in the single market programme, there is huge benefit there in promoting a one-stop shop approach, we'll say at regional level. And we also think communication could be improved in terms of promoting Your Europe portal and the Solve It portal, where citizens, any citizens, can access these and get an answer to their question immediately. I think the chain is rusty in places between the EU, national governments, regional and local governments. I think there'd be huge benefit if you had the regional assemblies in, and that we could see how local authorities can do more. Hitherto, local authorities seem to only be, you know, services. We're getting more into economic development now, and there's a larger role to play in terms of responding to citizens' needs and hosting different forums that can debate things like climate action, you know, what do you want from your region, and have a coordinated, I suppose, way of getting that message through Europe, through the National Assembly and back down again. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor McCarthy.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to reply to Deputy Haughey's question on local government reform, I'm 9 years a City Councillor in Cork City Council now, and I have to say, like, the local property tax and the rates are not enough for us to get a surplus at the end of the year. We're running on a deficit of 3-4 million every year. However, with EU funding, whether it's Interreg or EU Leader, we can get in the last 2 years through Interreg, Cork City Council has achieved €500,000. That's enough for us to think about doing up one of our heritage assets in Old Elizabethan Fort. It's enough in other local authorities to do projects on low carbon technologies, tourism, start-up growth. So that stuff is really, really important to us. And Senator Lydon, your point on the rise of populism and emigration, we hear that a lot as well within the Committee of the Regions, and there's this narrative out there that Europe is in crisis, and my response to that is that Europe has always been in crisis since the time that you mentioned in the 1940s. It's always responding to different things, Deputy Durkan, and from my point of view, when I'm on the ground and when we go into local and regional authorities across Europe, they're hunting for opportunities. I don't see a crisis. I mean, I have heard personal accounts in Greece and Italy of local councillors picking refugees up from beaches and burying them with their own money, with their own ward funding, which is heartbreaking to hear. And all that we can do as an Irish delegation is to call for funding for migrant integration. And also, as well as that, I mean, I say to my own council that, yeah, we've got a very healthy competition, Chair, between Cork and Kerry, for example, and there's a healthy competition between Cork and Dublin, and Cork and Galway, and Cork and Waterford. But there are 500 cities in Atlantic Europe that are hunting for opportunities. And if we're not aware of the 500 cities in Atlantic Europe, we're also not doing our jobs kind of well. And just to conclude, Chair, a few years ago, this House had a fantastic project called the National Forum on Europe, and I was a coordinator in Cork of a debating competition thing run by the late Senator Maurice Hayes, I think, and it was really, really great. And I think that could be a really great way to respond to Senator Lydon's way of bringing people together. You mentioned bringing in the regional assemblies. You've brought us in. The MEPs need to be brought in. The members of the Congress of Local Government need to be brought in. The Perm reps need to be brought in. The assemblies need to be brought in. We're all putting on the green jersey, as one of our COR members here constantly kind of says, and we're all looking at the same topic. So we all need to sing off the same hymn sheet. So it's very, very important that we work together. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Cahill. Just to respond to some of the queries and some of the comments from the committee, you know, in order to help small businesses, small farmers in outermost regions and coastal regions, we've been calling for a simplification of the application form, you know, and have a dedicated funding rather than funding from so many different agencies. This puts small companies off, it's too laborious and so on. And in order to revitalise coastal regions and island regions, we've also been calling for sustainable jobs in these areas. I've said in the past, we've always looked down for our energy, for coal and for gas and for oil. But now the time has come that we look up. We have lots of wind around the coast of Ireland. We have lots of wave power. And we do get sunshine from time to time. And I think to create sustainable jobs, we need to be looking at this form of energy now, not like the conventional ways in the past. This will help to keep communities in coastal areas, create jobs, create employment. And you know, we talk about the blue economy. I think that's the future. But you cannot have an economy without a community. So we need the communities there first, and the economy will follow. Thank you, Cahill.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Freeman,
you'll be glad to hear that just to reply to Senator Layden about whether we make reports at regional assembly level. Yes, we as members of the Committee of the Region do, and we present a 3-monthly report as well, which is more detailed. And certainly the members do participate and they engage with us because they're very interested in what's going on. So it's a very a great learning opportunity for a lot of the members. But I think it's also worth noting that the press do not come to regional assembly meetings, and I don't know whether the press see that maybe there isn't really much power at regional assembly level and they don't participate. So maybe that is telling us something. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Could I just, Jerry, are you okay, Jerry?
Just briefly, in terms of the low carbon economy, I just meant to add into the equation there that there was an opinion before the COR there about 12 months ago in relation to road freight, and one of the proposals is that the polluter pay principle that's applied to waste and water would be applied to road freight, and that essentially Europe intends to tax road freight off-road and onto rail, and that's why you have significant grant aid for low carbon transport initiatives such as rail. And so that's Europe is moving towards being a low carbon economy in 2050, and Ireland needs to make sure that we're there as well, and everything you buy product wise and otherwise will have a carbon footprint. So like climate change is kicking in. It's not abstract, and it's going to impact on us over the next number of decades. So basically we need to be ready to deal with that. In terms of populism, you people even in this country don't even know the fundamentals of local and national government. One time in the classroom you had civics and people knew how government worked or didn't work, and when they went to a ballot box they could make an informed and enlightened discussion. Sometimes I meet third level graduates and you'd be appalled at their lack of knowledge in terms of the fundamentals of local and national government. I encountered a third level graduate there last week, and he was very annoyed because there was a county development plan that was up for review, and he thought it was like a game of football because his group sent in 300 submissions and the counter group sent in 4. He thought it was a game of football and they had won 300 to 4. He couldn't explain to him about the statutory obligations to government and EU policy, etc. But that's really part of the level or the lack of information that's out there, and from that populism actually grows. And this particular individual, you couldn't convince him that it doesn't work that way. So I think there's a job of work to be done as well in the educational system right across Europe, because we are facing a very serious and significant crisis where basically a lot of these things are trashed out on social media and Facebook, and that's what's informing people, unfortunately. And there's a job of work for the Oireachtas and for all of Europe to do in relation to that issue as well.
Thank you very much. Could I just, on behalf of the committee, to thank you all very much, number one, for your work before you come here at all today, give you a presentation, but also obviously for taking time out to come here with the presentation. All of your contributions were very worthwhile. I just have to say that when Councillor Kieran McCarthy was talking about the bottom-up approach and letting people out in Europe know exactly what the implementation of the various programmes, there are between 400 and 600 programmes, avenues for delivering funding to around Europe. But yesterday, for instance, to give you a further example of that, we had the President of the European Court of Auditors here for an engagement. During the course of that engagement, I just, on behalf of the people that I represent, I was outlining the effect that decisions in Europe have on how we operate here in Ireland, how our farming, tourism, small business, how we get on, how we adapt, how we comply with the regulations, how we apply for secure funding, apply for and don't secure funding, and all of the red tape, the bureaucracy. And I was explaining that in great detail, as were other people that were in attendance at that meeting. And he told me afterwards that he really appreciated hearing it in that way, and in the way of a person from a small community who, the same as every one of us, and I want to welcome Deputy Mark McSherry here today, and people who, whether you're a councillor or a senator or a TD, I really believe passionately that councillors are highly, that their work isn't thought highly enough of. And quite simply, I believe that one of the worst attacks on democracy ever since the foundation of the state was the abolition of the town councils. I passionately believed in that. My colleagues all know that I wasn't being political when I was saying that. I wasn't giving out about the government at the time, saying, oh, you're doing this, and criticising them. I wouldn't care who was in power or who made that decision. I would have been critical of it. If I was part of an organisation that was making that decision at the time, I would have been critical of it. Quite simply because I believe that the work that town councillors, city councillors and county councillors, the work that they do is actually invaluable. I know that where I'm from, town councils that were abolished, like Cullinane Town Council, they were doing completely invaluable work that hasn't been replaced since. And the funny thing about the make-up of a council, you have different people who have their own life's experiences and their own expertise. And for instance, a typical example in Cullinane Town Council, we had councillors who were specialists in one field or another, and they used to all come together at their monthly meetings and bring that. It was like a group of experts coming together and then making the connection with the county council, then with their Oireachtas members. And we were like tiers of different levels of support for our communities. And I just saw that as an awful attack at that time, And so I just want to put it on record, my appreciation, and I know my colleagues appreciate 100% the work that councillors do, but you in particular then in your present role, and to thank you for being here. We'd love to engage longer, and please don't think that I'm cutting things short or anything, but we've to go into private session now, and if we don't keep going, we could stay at this till 10 o'clock tonight. And not that that would be a bad thing, but that we can't because of other obligations. So thank you all very much again. And Michael, do you want to finish up?
Just a final word, just on behalf of the delegation, on behalf of the team that support us that I mentioned earlier on. We'd like to thank you, Chair, thank the senators and deputies that attended and, shall we say, held us to account today as well. We really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to appear before the Oireachtas Committee on European Affairs. Can I thank the team behind the scenes as well? A lot of tic-tacking there with Heidi. We really appreciate the opportunity to come here to tell the story of our role, of our impact at European level on behalf of cities and regions. You know, Europe is all about challenges and opportunities, but in terms of the challenges, the Irish delegation will always seek opportunity within those challenges, and in terms of the opportunities, we'll always try and grasp as much of those opportunities as we can for our cities and regions. But thank you, Chair, thank you, Deputies, and thank you, Senator. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And we have to suspend the meeting now for a few minutes to go into private session.